Every parent knows that their child is a prodigy. A genius, the smartest person in the world. This became evident for us when our daughter learned to read when she was 4. I know other parents who have had children learn to read at that age and some who have challenges with this. But for us, what happened was one night I was reading to my daughter, and as often happens, I was tired and bored and a little grumpy, and so I skipped a page, and my daughter said, "You missed a bit." And I thought to myself, well, she's memorized the story, as children do, except that this was a new book that she had never seen before. And so I pointed at a word, and I said, "What is this word?" And she said, "Elephant," or whatever the word was. And I pointed at another word, and I realized at this point that she had, seemingly without effort, made the connection between the printed page and the words in her head. And this is a real problem. It's a problem because now she's learning how to write. And this is, Dad is busy. She's learning how to write, and it's not coming as effortlessly as learning to read did. She gets her S's backwards. She writes large, and she runs out of room, and she splits words in half. And it's a real challenge because learning to read was so easy for her that learning to write now is an effort, and it gets frustrating. This is my imaginary, made-up learning curve for her learning how to write. On the bottom is time, and on the left side is the amount of effort required to move to the next phase or to learn the next thing. So at the very beginning, it's easy. She can make marks on a page. Some of them start to look like letters. But now she's approaching a place where it's difficult because every time she writes an S, it's backwards, and she gets frustrated. And so she has this steep learning curve in the process of learning how to write. She's also learning how to play the piano. This is her teaching her younger brother how to play the piano. And similarly, she's having difficulty because at the very beginning, the piano is an amazing instrument. You just put your finger down and you have this beautiful sound come out of it without any effort on your behalf. You can put many fingers down and you can get beautiful sounds out of it. So the learning curve to me looks similar. At the beginning, it's easy, but then there's this sort of barrier in the middle, especially for her. This is her right now. She's sort of moving along this curve, and she starts to learn how to play melodies. And so she works on this, and then she has a problem. And it's even worse than learning how to write because she falls off of this learning curve and gets frustrated and goes back to her magical music, which is great, but it's not the melody she's aiming for. And so she has these frustrations. And Malcolm Gladwell tells us that this will take her 10,000 hours to get from the beginning to being an expert. And so we thought to ourselves, maybe a different instrument might be a good place to start. This one has a different feel and a different sort of expression, and to me the learning curve looks kind of like this. You begin, and everybody starts at the same place. There's not really any bumps or difficulties along the way, but there's only so far you can go. There are no kazoo virtuosos, unless they're being ironic. So maybe that's not as good. It doesn't matter if you spend 10,000 hours on the kazoo, you're still going to be more or less where you started. So what about this instrument? This is my grandfather's harmonica. And similarly to the piano, you sort of get a head start. You can blow into it, and not only do you get nice notes, but you get good harmonies. And that's great. But similar to learning how to play the piano, there's only so far you can go before you have to do a lot of extra work. So you can get to this point, which is where many grandfathers get to and play Oh Susanna. Or you can spend 10,000 hours learning to bend and learning technique, and you can get to the point up here where you can play the William Tell Overture at Carnegie Hall. But that takes an awful long time. What about the violin? This is another instrument that a lot of children learn how to play, and it's fantastic to see a child learn to play this for the first time because they pick up the violin. How many of you have seen a child play the violin for the first time? They have this sense of wonder and awe, and they pick up the bow and they pick up the violin, and they make this horrendous, horrendous noise that you just don't want to hear again. And it takes a little bit of time and specifically external motivation before you can get into the place where you can play the violin and make a sound that you yourself would like to hear. So to me, this is what the violin looks like. At the beginning, it's difficult. There's a lot of work to get to the next level, but there's a place in the middle where you can sort of become self-motivated. I call this competence. It's not a very romantic word. It's the point, though, where you're no longer a novice at it, but you become good enough that you can self-motivate. You can self-gratify. You can play it for your own pleasure. And this takes a while to get to. And of course, it's going to take 10,000 hours to become the most amazing expert in the world. But if you can get past that difficulty, if you can get past the initial stuff to the point where you are at this plateau of competence, then you're self-motivated. You don't have to have your parent scolding you saying you have to practice. You can do it yourself because you're interested in it. And I think this is true for a lot of things that you can do with your life. Here's juggling, integral calculus, and sketching. I don't know if anybody's put those three together with music before, but with juggling, you have these beanbags, and you start and you throw them and you don't catch them. And it's difficult, and it's repetitive, and it's frustrating. But once you can do a transfer, then suddenly you can do it for your own pleasure, which is great. The same with integral calculus. The same with sketching. You start by drawing stick figures. Don't get me wrong, some of my favorite webcomics are stick figures. But if you want to draw things that are realistic, if you want to draw a human face that somebody else would look at and say, that's an amazing human face, it takes a lot of effort, a long time before you can do that. Right? But once you can get into that, once you can get past into the plateau of competence, then you can draw for pleasure. You can juggle for pleasure and even do integral calculus for pleasure. And I think the amazing thing about this, particularly with music, is this is the point where we get to play. Musicians have done an amazing thing by convincing us that their job is to play. What do you do for a living? I play the piano. I think that's amazing that you play for your work. What other people besides musicians, athletes get to play for a living? And children. This is their job, is to play. And you get to the point of competence where playing is what you do. It does take you a lot of work to get there. But this work is sort of the price of entry, right? The cost of doing business before you can play for a living. But does it have to be as much work? If you're a mountain climber, you don't start at sea level. You start at a base camp, halfway up. Nobody would say you were less of a mountain climber if you started from a base camp. It makes sense. It's the way you go. Is there a way to do this with music? Is there a base camp for music? Musical instruments, particularly the violin and the piano, haven't changed much in the last 300 or 400 years, and yet we have all of this modern technology that makes it easier to do tasks that are boring or repetitive or dangerous. And what's more boring or repetitive than playing scales on the piano? It's a thing that has to be done before you have the muscle memory to get really, really good at playing the piano, but it is tedious and boring and repetitive and requires external motivation in the form of your parents saying, practice or else you don't get to play video games, before you can be internally motivated. So, if it takes 10,000 hours to start from scratch and get to being an expert, what if we could cut off that bit that takes time, that boring, repetitive, annoying stuff? Short circuits to get to the point where we're already competent at something, right? Maybe it would only take 7,000 hours to be an expert. What if there was a violin you could pick up and it would play right away without making cat scratches? Would that then make it quicker to get to being an expert? Well, there are already violins like that. They're in the toy stores. They're sort of pinky, plasticky kind of, and they make a nice noise, but there's only so far you can go with those. Maybe if we cut that bottom off, maybe it becomes a kazoo. Right? Maybe we don't get to be an expert. Maybe we have limits then on the virtuosity of that particular instrument. So in the Armadillo Research Lab, we have been studying the piano and why it's difficult, why it takes time to learn how to play the piano. One of the things we've looked at is the fact that the piano is biased in the key of C major, or A minor, or any of the other modes if you want to look at them that way. And it's laid out in a linear fashion. It means the notes next to each other sort of progress upwards, which makes some logical sense but it doesn't make a ton of musical sense, and it has some really difficult consequences. These are all the major triads that you as a student of a piano would have to learn and memorize and know. Okay? Now, I want you to close your eyes, and I want you to tell me, those of you who have perfect pitch, don't play this game, but I want you to tell me, closing your eyes, which major triad I'm playing. Which one of those 12 was it? Who knows? Because they're all the same. It's the same musical construct. In fact, there aren't 12, there are sort of 6. But some of them have more, and you have to remember which one is which. It's the same musical construct, but music students, piano students have to learn 12 different ways of playing it. The same for major scales. Any of the scales you have to play, you have to learn 12 different ways of doing that. So we wanted to find a way to do this kind of a thing, to be able to play all these different scales, without having to learn them over and over and over again in different keys. We were investigating the idea of an isomorphic keyboard. This is an alternative arrangement of notes, where instead of having the notes in a line, what you do is, in this particular case, you have major thirds in the northeast direction and minor thirds in the southeast direction. And that means that wherever you start on this layout, if you start on the C, C is colored red to give you a focus of where you are. If you start on the C, if you go up in the northeast direction, you're going to get major thirds. And if you go down in the southeast direction, you're going to get minor thirds. Now, taking this idea, and this isn't a new idea, this has been around since the 1700s, taking this idea and again drawing all of those triads, we get this. Same notes are white and black. Again, there's 12 of them, depending on where you start, but you should be able to notice something already. It's one shape. A major triad has one shape on an isomorphic keyboard. Isomorphic, same shape. Okay? Every musical construct has a single shape on an isomorphic keyboard. So you don't have to learn 12 shapes. You learn one. So we got really excited about this idea, and we put it on an iPad app. It's called Musics, and it allows you to experiment with lots of different isomorphic layouts. This one's called Wiki Hayden. It puts perfect fifths and perfect fourths upwards directions, and then whole tones across, and it's actually been popularized on the concertina, so these things have been around for a little while. The problem with the iPad, though, is that it doesn't make a very good musical instrument. There are advantages with it. It's amazing to be able to touch and move things around, but if you've ever tried to type, say, on an iPad, you know that you have to sort of keep your eyes on it. And keeping your eyes on your musical instrument isn't really what musicians do, if you've ever noticed that. Right? They'll be looking at each other. They'll be making eye contact with their ensemble. They'll be looking at the conductor. They'll be grooving away, whatever it is, but your eyeballs are not on your instrument. Right? So that's not going to work for this. It's a great experimentation tool, and we've used it a lot, but we decided that actually what we really need is a physical version of this. An instrument that puts the notes in this sort of layout and allows you to play it like a real instrument. And I happen to have it here, and I'd like to show it to you now, if this is going to. So this is called the Rainboard, and I hope you can see it. It's brightly lit, and it's fun to look at. I'm just going to make sure that the software is all running as it should. This should work here. As long as we have sound coming through. So right now I have this arranged in that layout I showed you first, where if you take your fingers like this, you'll get a major triad regardless of where you go. Okay, so this is a major triad, but it's a major triad wherever I start. So that's now one musical construct that you've learned in 30 seconds. Here is a major scale. I'm just going to show it to you. And that's every major scale. So you've learned 12 major scales now in another 5 seconds. And this is the real advantage of these new, not so new, isomorphic layouts, is that you learn one shape, and that pattern gives you everything you need. So this one is actually set up so that the notes are colored as you might expect. The notes that are traditionally white are colored blue here. The notes that would be traditionally black are colored red. But it's not actually in the key of C, it's in the key of D flat, because why not, right? The key is now irrelevant. We call it key agnostic, because it doesn't matter really what key you're in. I'm going to change it a little bit now so that it's no longer colored by the key. In fact, now it's going to be colored by the note that it has. And this is really gratifying because what it does is it means that you no longer have to think about what key you're in, because the layout takes care of it for you. In this layout, I've got octaves going this way, whole tones going this way. This is the Wiki Hayden layout I showed you before, and I'm not going to play it in any particular key. I'm going to play it in the key of yellow. Now I'm going to play it in the key of light teal, which is kind of cool. And again, you learn the pattern, and you've got every major scale. Now this one is great because the patterns actually do the work for you of your music theory. If you know your music theory, your major scale is tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone. But the minor key then is tone, semitone. You've learned every major scale and every minor scale. There's the major chords, there's the minor chords. So you can subvert all of this music theory that takes you so long to learn, and you can do it all, let the layout take care of it for you. Now, Nevin wanted me to play something because, here's an instrument. The problem with this, of course, is that there are no experts on the Rainboard because it hasn't existed for 10,000 hours, let alone had anybody practice it for 10,000 hours. But I'd really like to see what conductors, composers, and musicians can do with this thing because it's very, very exciting to us. Oh, I forgot to show you the best part. You need to have a whammy bar or something like that.